Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, presented by Cooper Tires. Here we are, race week for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And while I won't be there in person, which saddens me deeply, I figured, let's try and tell some stories and also get to know some of the good folks that make Le Mans such a memorable and, frankly, incredible event. And with that said, my pal Andy Blackmore, one of the world's elite livery designers, his work is featured on 1 or 2 dozen cars spread across IMSA and the Pirelli World Challenge Series. His spotter guides, though, I think that's what brought Andy to more international acclaim than anything. I know that more than 100,000 people download his 24 Hours of Le Mans spotter guides from his spotterguides.com site. And so, with that said, knowing that he puts together artwork for 60 cars for this event, with about 20 pieces of unique information for each car added in, wanted to bring Andy, who's a little bit of someone who plays in the background, right? We see his work a lot, but I don't know how many folks have gotten to know Andy. Wanted to bring him forward a little bit. So we speak about his upbringing, his background, some of the funny stories of how artistry became his life. Spoke about some of the racing teams and entities he's worked for, including McLaren and Formula One, and also now, for many years, with his own Andy Blackmore design business, where he does liveries for a lot of clients. On this topic specifically, does these glorious print them out and frame them type artwork quality spotter guides. But how do they come together? What's the process? When does he start? How long does it take to draw each car from scratch? What does he have in his arsenal already? The process of working with teams, many of which are incredibly helpful, some that aren't. Those that call out any mistakes that might be made, whether they're on his guide or others that have come along that mirror, if not outright copy his and such. So just thought it'd be fun to get to know Andy a bit and the process that goes into the this mad thing that I don't have the ability to do. I think most people, I assume most people are like me and marvel at his talents and the ability to create a spotter's guide with 60 unique cars. Just madness to me. You can get every episode of the Marshall Pruitt Podcast on iTunes. You can also get it on Podbean. We have our Marshall Pruitt Podcast Facebook page. We also have our growing Marshall Pruitt YouTube page. Would urge you politely to subscribe to everything I just mentioned. The YouTube channel is one we're trying to grow. We've got some more videos coming here shortly. So anyways, with all that said, let's get going with Andy Blackmore, the man, and Andy Blackmore, and breaking down how he creates these crazy, crazy Le Mans spotter guides. Andy Blackmore, I have wanted to dive inside that brilliant mind of yours and try and figure out how these gorgeous, opulent keepsakes of yours, these Le Mans spotter guides, get created. And so with the 24 Hours of Le Mans almost here, I figured let's do that. And thank you for not only saying yes, but also taking my suggestion to reveal a little bit more of the process than maybe, was a little bit comfortable in the beginning. But the reality is, I don't think there are many people who can do what you do, and you've built a vast empire in Western Canada as a result. But all kidding aside, before we get into spotter guides and what you do for the 24 Hours of Le Mans and also for IMSA at, their events as well, I figure folks should get to know you and who you are a little bit. So let's start there, Andy. Tell us about where you were born and the environment where auto racing became a part of your life.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. So as you can probably tell from my accent, I originally come from the UK, born in Bristol, which is one of the biggest cities, child of the 70s, and I was always into cars from a young age. I've got pictures of me on Christmas Day at sort of 3 and 4 years old with Austin Allegro posters on the bedroom wall and stuff. So my parents obviously had a questionable taste in cars. But as I was going through some photos actually on the weekend and found a decayed photo from when I was about 8 or 9, and obviously taste had got better because I had a Fiat 131 Mirafiori rally car from the Acropolis, and an
Wow.
Alpine A442 on my bedroom wall, actually on my ceiling. So yeah, always been into cars. As a kid, there I entered a few newspaper competitions, and Renault had a owners club magazine, so entered that and won a couple of competitions for jackets and bags and stuff like that. So that sort of pushed me to explore car design.
So
And
competitions, that I find interesting. Competitions through whatever means that you found them was a way for you to not only take on challenges, but also realize that there was a competitive element. And I just mentioned that because, I think a lot of folks draw for the passion of whatever art that they happen to do. And I'm not saying that you don't have a passion, but I think the fact that you were really from very early on doing something artistically with a little bit of a competitive element. I don't know if I've heard that angle or that story for someone who is now so heavily involved in motor racing. So that's pretty cool.
yeah, I suppose the first one I did was a local, newspaper in Bristol. They had like colouring competition and stuff, and I did a couple of cars, and they were atrocious. I was sort of 7 years old, so they were like purple tyres and green seats and stuff, and very weird perspective. But yeah, I can't remember what I won, but I won something small there. And then my father had a Renault 9, which wasn't the best car in the world,
Oh,
a
you
Renault
poor
Alliance.
child, yes.
But that was the time of Prost and Arnoux and stuff, so Renault were pretty cool. So I entered a competition in their magazine, won, I think won a jacket, did another one, won a sports bag, did another one. And then my parents got a letter suggesting that maybe I just ease off for a couple of months. So yeah, that sort of, that was quite fun. And then actually, I've just remembered when I was about 17, I entered a James Bond competition to
What?
design a futuristic car in a magazine in the UK called Computer in Video Games, and as usual thing, spikes coming out the wheels and flamethrowers and bombs and stuff like that. And I won that, and I won a 100cc zip kart. And much as I
Wow.
wanted to go karting, and it was a proper 100cc Britain, it was, it was the real deal. When we explored it, even back in, what would this be, in 1987, it was to be competitive because for whatever reason, my mindset was, well, we got to be, if we're going to go karting with this kart we've just won, I want to be, good. So when we explored it, it just didn't make financial sense for our family anyway, because of engine rebuilds and tyres and stuff. And I was going off to college and I needed a car. So as soon as
Smart. Smart.
as soon as the 120 days was up or whatever that was in the regulations, I sold it and I bought another car that was available in North America, a Chevette. So and then I transplanted a 2.3 twin cam engine into that.
Oh, I
So
love it.
little Chevette wagon, because we had a little what they call estates in the UK. So a little Vauxhall Chevette, complete sleeper, and it had a Vauxhall Magnum engine in it. So yeah, that was good.
Wow. So you take the winning, and the fact that I guess you've earned recognition early on that you can draw things and color things as a young lad. Where does that start to get solidified, Andy? Either university or otherwise? Because I know that you had to, there's one thing being good at home, drawing in your room, but, learning how to do things from a commercial standpoint, doing liveries and other things, I would assume that there was some formal education involved.
Yeah, there was that, and also at home. My father was a design engineer, worked on Concorde and various helicopters like Westland Lynx, and did some submarine stuff. So he was an engineer. So I got a lot of the technical ability sort of from seeing him, because he used to also design extensions and conversions for houses, sort of part-time job. So that was in our house. So I often saw how he was going about stuff. We had a huge drawing board, which I used to commandeer. So a lot of it came from that. Also school, my two favorite subjects were art and then later technical drawing. So I think all those combined, and obviously my love of cars, all those combined just sort of focused me in one fairly narrow channel. So I ended up going on a graphic design course to try and get the necessary qualifications to do a car design course. And I made sure that every single project on that graphic design course had a vehicle element. So even if it was a brochure for a local tourist attraction, I made sure that was like the trams in Weston-super-Mare, which was a seaside town near Bristol. I had to do corporate identity for a multinational company. So we managed to do a breakdown service in the UK, and whilst doing that, design new basically breakdown vehicles. So every single thing I was trying to put a car design side to thing.
There was some sort of
yeah. And my tutors at that point were awesome because they understood what I was trying to achieve. So even though it didn't technically meet the curriculum, and they made allowances and adjustments. And there was another guy on my course that was really, really good, a guy called Spencer, and he ended up working for Aardman Animation and then Pixar. And that was the same thing. They allowed him to push the boundaries and push what was allowed in the curriculum so that he could then basically be in a better position for the next stage of his education. So certainly indebted, to them and the college from way back in 1988.
And so from there, Andy, where does the racing, the employment, I don't know whether it would be an internship or otherwise, but where does the introduction to the artistic side of motor racing, at least from a professional standpoint, start to kick off for you?
Well, after my graphics course, I did a car design degree in Coventry in England, and at that point it was one of really only 3 or 4 courses in the world, basically, that was a degree level, much like Pasadena or the RCA, a little bit below that, but they obviously had, it was 4 years of projects with a work placement, and most of my projects were either racing based or centered around fairly low volume production like supercars and sports cars. So I was already sort of, I suppose, ending up in a bit of a narrow tunnel, actually, because when it came to work placements, I was struggling to get a placement with any of the big car companies like, at the time Rover and Jaguar and stuff, because my stuff was a bit too specialized and sporty. So on the advice of a couple of people, they suggested that I'd write to loads of companies. So I wrote to like over 100 companies all over Europe looking for placement, even if it was unpaid. I needed a placement for the course, and it made sense to do something I wanted to do rather than end up designing, I don't know, bathroom fittings or kettles or something like that.
That could be the next stage of your career. I mean, come on.
I hope not.
Spotter guides for bathroom fixtures.
Yeah. So I had a couple of replies, and then I had one from a company called Ypsilon Technology. Now they were a Yamaha R&D company that was in the old Aston Martin Proteus buildings. So basically that had gone belly up, and Yamaha had bought it lock, stock and barrel, and they were developing a 2-seater tandem road car with a detuned F1 engine. So this was 92, 93, so before the McLaren F1. So I ended up with a placement there, and unfortunately the project got put on hold because of the recession that happened in Japan at that time, and then eventually cancelled. But I'd just done enough, literally by 2 days, I'd just done enough to qualify for my work placement. And from that, I made quite a few connections in motorsport, and actually my final year project was sponsored by a race team called 3001, who I ended up working for, and the design manager or the design engineer at Yamaha also worked there, and his name was John Baldwin, and he was involved in the Lotus 4-wheel drive, the gas turbine car,
Wow, real
McLaren
veteran.
Indy, and then later some of the panels and stuff. So he was a real, even though he was an engineer, he was a real mentor, gave me a lot of guidance. And again, another guy I'm totally indebted to that sadly passed away at Road Atlanta, of all places. So he was, he was very cool, very helpful and stuff. So that's how I ended up, really, was the Yamaha, John Baldwin, and 3001 connection.
So you take that, and where does that evolve into, or I guess timeline-wise, because I know that you obviously spent some good time at McLaren on Formula One, or with Formula One projects of theirs outside Formula One. I know that there was a stop at Electronic Arts, EA there as well, but I guess on the path that we're getting to here, the primary point of your design liveries, your spotter guides and such. Tell me a little bit about the stops at McLaren, then also at EA, and I guess what that gave you. I mean, I know how beautiful the cars are, the liveries that you did there, but what did that do for you career-wise to move you along?
Well, I'd always dreamed of working for, when I was a teen, Lotus. Well, at that time, Lotus were not exactly strong as they once were. So I always wanted to work for a Lotus or a McLaren or Williams. So, it was very much motor racing based. So when I was at 3001, the head of 3001, Michael, knows Ron Dennis, was even Ron's best man. And I ended up doing quite a few projects for McLaren as a 3001 employee, including the 95 Golf GTR and the 95 West F1 GTR liveries. We also did some work on a double-decker motorhome, which was the first double-decker motorhome in the F1 paddock back in the time. So this is 94. So I ended up at McLaren for a few trips, a few meetings, and one of those, just as I was leaving, Ron took me aside and said, "Oh, if you ever fancied a change, just let me know." So this was like the first week of December, and then I think the third week of December, I then sent the letter. And then literally on the 23rd of December, I had a letter back from Ron, which, I don't keep too many sort of mementos and stuff, but that's one thing I have framed, and it basically said, whatever you do, don't do anything before I come back in January.
Wow.
So I had an interview, and which was quite the experience because, he's legendary for his job interviews, and what with Senna and Berger and stuff. And my interview, he knew exactly what I was on, exactly where I lived, exactly what my car did, MPG, and he offered us a very slight amount more than what I was on, and it was take it or leave it.
Wow.
Of course, I took it, and that was obviously rectified once I proved myself. So I did some stuff on the Grand Prix program early on, and it was mainly liveries. And then I did most of the F1 GTR liveries in 95 and 96. So that was amazing. And that was a real eye-opener because suddenly you'd gone from somebody at uni or somebody from a small company and it was full on, it was very aggressive in terms of what you had to get done and the creation and also the quality. And it was just expected every time that everything had to be perfect. So, and then I ended up moving around McLaren as projects required. So I came up I didn't come up with a brief, but I came up with the original concepts and look for the McLaren two-seater when it was a marketing proposal. So that was a really cool project. And then I ended up mainly on the Grand Prix race team, and I designed most of the pit equipment in the garage, overhead gantries, pit crew, helmets that look like Darth Vader, things. And in those days, it was no expense spared. So, these helmets would cost a fortune and nobody quibbled. Just had to be the best. So different times, very enjoyable, but it was full on. And I think after 5 years, I was pretty burnt out.
I bet. It sounds like you were doing everything. So there's a point here where you're coming up on starting your own company, Andy Blackmore Design. Tell us about the move to EA, though, because I think that was I think as we're getting to the core topic here, my guess is there was something there that helped you see, so it's not so regimented. I'm getting to design a lot of different things. Should I do this for one entity and receive a single paycheck, or should I become my own entity and hopefully receive multiple paychecks from clients?
Totally. Part of that started in '92 when I was still at uni, and another competition. I didn't realize how many competitions I'd entered.
Blackmore.
So I'd entered this competition in a car newspaper called Auto Express to design a livery for the Toyota UK British Touring Car Team, and won that. And off of that, I ended up doing some work for BMW Schnitzer UK. On their UK car and stuff. And then that went quiet, started at McLaren, and obviously I was doing some liveries then. And then I had a couple of McLaren customers come to me, either to do their McLarens or, in the case of Day Price Racing, then to do the panels. And really doing the panels and a couple of the others, that started to make me think, yeah, I could do this for a living. It's just basically getting enough work. So from the mid-time at McLaren and all my time at EA, I was doing the odd livery on the side and a couple of British touring car body kit designs. And both McLaren and particularly EA were completely open to me working freelance on the side. A lot of big companies won't agree to that. With EA, I obviously couldn't work for another computer game company. So being burnt out from McLaren, I left. Joined EA. I got approached to join EA after somebody asked me, do you know anybody who wants to model texture Formula One cars? And of course, it's something I'd never thought about. So I thought I'd do that for a couple of years and see where things are. And cut a long story short, I ended up moving to Canada with EA in 2005. And I worked on Formula One games, Need for Speed games, a little bit of Burnout, a couple of rally games, and then I left EA in 2012. Prior to that, EA had launched two things with Need for Speed. One was Speed Hunters, which was a car culture blog that's still going now, and the other was Team Need for Speed, which was a multi-discipline racing program. So they did drift, time attack, GT3 racing and stuff. So I got involved to do all the liveries for that, and that, I think the Team Need for Speed thing really was the catalyst for, right, I've got to make a move, I can do this. But it was a few years before we were in a position to be able to do that. But I think the Team Need for Speed project, because it was so well received, I think that was probably the catalyst.
So let's move to the livery side, Andy, because I know that workflow-wise, that would probably be the thing that allows you to knock out a 24-hour Le Mans spotter guide with 60 entries. And I want to find out more about, how long that takes, etc., the working process of teams and series and such. But we should probably stop here and spend a little bit of time on livery design, because I would guess that's probably your number one breadwinner in terms of how you look after yourself and your wife and daughter and whatnot. But tell me about this, because it's one thing to sit in a design office and have someone come in and say, all right, here's a Mustang and green might be a good color, and add some wacky stuff to it, and oh boy, it's going to be great. It's another thing to have to go into a paddock, probably, at least for the first time, with a bunch of folks you really don't know, and say, hi, please pay me to make your car look better and make your sponsors happier. Not everybody's built for that kind of, hand-to-hand, face-to-face interaction, trying to recruit business to start a new chapter in their life. So tell me about this livery side, because, again, I guess that's something that you've really kind of made the core of what you do.
Yeah, it is my bread and butter. And to be honest, I'm one of those people that finds it hard to talk or sell themselves walking around the paddock. So luckily the digital age helps a little bit like that, but there's nothing like a face-to-face meeting. So I'd already met quite a few people from when I was doing the Speed Hunters blog. So my remit on Speed Hunters was really most motor racing. So that allowed me to go to the Nürburgring, Le Mans, Dubai 24 hours, and a whole host of ALMS races. So I'd made quite a few contacts there. So that was my first port call. And the first year was a bit of a struggle because I didn't have too much. But just kept working at it and just make sure that whatever you put out was top quality. So people then start asking. A couple of teams were very helpful and allowed me to have my logo on the back of the car and stuff like that, which helps. At the same time, I was doing the LMS spotter guides, and that's a very useful networking tool because you also end up with all the contact details for all the teams. So, when you do a brochure trying to sell yourself, you've got a nice mail list. So I suppose the liveries, I obviously have a catalogue of cars drawn up from either the CAD or reference material that's been supplied by the team and or the manufacturer. And then you'll get a brief, literally like you said with the Mustang. I like red cars, but I'd like something flashy. That was one brief. Another brief was literally done in Crayola crayons. And had flames on it, and that was quite a high-end team actually in North America Motorsport.
I'm sorry for doing that, by the way. I didn't mean to send it to you in crayon, but I apologize.
And then other ones you end up working to the minute detail with a driver, sponsor, or client, and they're all enjoyable for different reasons. And quite often, when you get a collaboration with the sponsor or the driver, then you get or the team, you get a better product because I'm very much about a collaborative approach, because at the end of the day, the sponsor or the team needs to be happy. It's not necessarily my idea of what looks good. It's my idea and interpretation of what looks good for the sponsor. So we were basically, I come up with some rough concepts, 5-6 rough concepts. They go back to the sponsor. Or the team, I get feedback. We choose 2 or 3, develop that, go back 2 or 3, and then we get on basically a final design, and then we just clean and develop that. So again, it's all about collaborating with the team or sponsor and making sure everything's resolved. And then a part of the design process, which people might not be aware of, is how a car is wrapped or painted. So I put a lot of effort into that. So I wouldn't say I'm unique, but I put a lot more effort than some people do. So I actually create a wrap file which includes bleeds, includes annotations, how to wrap it, how to do this, because then it reduces the sort of a chance of a stripe being in a slightly different place or a wrong place. So I spend a lot of time doing that, and I certainly over the years that's helped, because I know teams have come back to me partly because of that, because I give so much information. So you just make sure that it's what goes out the door is a finished product, whether it's a simple car with a stripe or whether it's something like, the P1 Motorsports Mercedes, So it just got to make sure it's, because it's your calling card as well. It's what people see in the paddock.
So you have the art files that you've created. I know that you obviously get a little bit of help from here or there from maybe a manufacturer or whatever if you're needing something or working on something that is probably private or, under non-disclosure or something like that. How does this build into a spotter's guide, Andy, where you've got, how's this? Le Mans is in the middle of June every year. Mm-hmm. You know that there are a number of cars where their liveries are revealed a few months earlier, but you also know that there's a lot of business that gets done, whether it's drivers, changing teams, being added or deleted, sponsors coming and going, could be color changes. Walk us through maybe the start of your 24-hour Le Mans spotter guide process, when it starts, and how and when you start connecting with teams to get the right info.
So the process for the Le Mans Spotter Guide starts around May, and for the IMSA guides, which is actually an even bigger product because it can be as many as 100 cars with WeatherTech and Continental, that one would start at the beginning of December. The problem we have, or I have, is that if I contact teams too early, they don't have anything solidified. So, just wasting time. So I need to leave it as late as I can. So with Le Mans, we've obviously got the advantage of knowing what the cars are from, Spa and in previous years Silverstone. The initial process is the same as creating a livery. I need to have a base drawing of a car, which is to scale. Again, with the liveries, the teams and manufacturers will often help. So I will have scale drawings. I will sometimes have the logos from the teams. Sometimes I have to create them myself. Color palettes again. Sometimes I have to use photo reference. Sometimes teams will send it. But regardless, I always draw the cars again by scratch. And the main reason for that is to give a consistent look, not only across the guide, but also across other guides. So I do all the IMSA guides, and I also do Lamborghini Super Trofeo. So hopefully all those cars have a slight style, which, I keep to. I could put more detail in the cars, but at the end of the day, I need to get 60 cars done for them all. So again, similar to the liveries, I have a library of base cars. So I have Légers and I have high downforce, low downforce. I have all the cars, and then I have the various differences. So for example, the Ferrari 488 Evo in GTE Pro is slightly different to the AM. So again, I have those, and I have these base cars which have all the line work, and then I put the liveries. If you imagine it's layers, I put all the liveries underneath that, and then I work with the teams to make sure I have the right logos and the right coloration for things like mirrors and stuff. And the Le Mans Bar Guide gets over 100,000 unique downloads a year. The IMSA guides, I think they produce something like 50,000 printed copies, and I probably get about the same number of downloads. So a clued up team will know that getting their sponsor accurately represented in the guides is good for their business as well, because hardcore fans are going to have these guides, casual fans are going to have these guides, and so you're getting your logo and your branding, your coloration in the hands, whether you're at the track or at home. So certainly with IMSA, virtually every single team helps me and sends me stuff and gives me, like you say, stuff ahead of time. Sometimes I've signed NDAs, but over the years, people know to trust me. And with Le Mans, it's a little bit harder because I just do the one event a year. So I get like about half the teams, and some teams are so helpful. It's, they'll give contact details for some of the other teams, So there's, there's a lot of support in the paddock, definitely.
So before we get a little further into the process, I know that there's a little bit of fun involved here too. From a practical standpoint, you've had a long association, long friendships with, Radio Le Mans and, many other sites, broadcasters as well, because, there's a unique need for a spotter's guide when you have a field like Daytona with 40, 50 plus cars, Le Mans with 60 cars. A lot of the cars look similar. Sometimes you'll have a 4-car team like Ford where it's the same car 4 times. Yep. But, there are little differences. It could be the wing mirrors are a different color. There could be a different windshield banner. And, giving folks a tool either at home or at the track or in the broadcast booth to stay on top of what's what, who's in what, that part's invaluable. Folks can obviously go to your spotterguides.com site to get your spotter guides. There's also some other folks that do spotter guides, and I love the fact that, this might be a little bit of inside baseball, but I love the fact, Andy, that you've become so heavily associated with spotter guides, specifically in sports car racing, and I think, again, most heavily with Le Mans, that you get a lot of feedback on all the things you've done wrong and all the mistakes you've made. And, let's just say that more often than not, it's about work that isn't yours.
Yes, there's a series which does the spot guide that I often get emails, and I've even had emails from team managers going, "You've got the nationality wrong, you've got this wrong," and it's not mine. Luckily, I have a great little team of people that help me proofread the spotter guides before they go out, and obviously I've learned from my own mistakes over the years. So there's this Dutch girl called Cher Edam, is it?
Not sure, and we're not even sure if it's a she. We're Graham Goodwin and we just refer to it as an it because we're not sure what it is. But yes, I've heard.
Fair
that
enough.
It has been helpful.
Said that. No, but seriously, Shay is awesome. She goes through it with a fine-tooth comb. She's got an encyclopedic knowledge. She's been awesome. And again, she did it this year, and she on the weekend she was going through it, and she's in a cottage up in the other side of Canada without internet, and still she had like a long list of, this could be this and this could be that. And so she's awesome. Marcel Tencat also helps out massively. And then a couple of Midweek Motorsport Collective guys like Paul Marquardt helps out as well, and Daniel Hansel. And they're awesome because, they make sure I kept on my toes, make sure it's correct. And then, like you say, getting the reference can be a bit of a challenge. And what you get in terms of artwork might not actually be what's on the car, because sponsors change and things change, or the car specification changes. So a couple of DSC photographers.
DailySportsCar.com.
Yep, Daily Sports Car. Peter May, and David Lord, they helped me. And they're really, really, on it. And they've just sent me like sort of 30 or 40 photos of detailed logos and, stuff like that. So I get a lot of help and a lot of support, which just makes it just a little bit more, easier to do 60 cars in about 3-4 weeks, which is quite a challenge. And then this year I've got also had Adam Prescott help out. So, those people are huge helps to get all this done, because I also have, like you say, the bread and butter, my liveries to do as well as this. So
let's close, Andy, on something that I I love, and I'm trying to make this an informational podcast and get to know Andy a little bit, but I also need to share just an appreciation as someone who has printed out and laminated your Le Mans spotter guides for many years and will be doing so again. As someone who writes and does a variety of different things in my profession, I am always aware from a production standpoint of steps. Meaning, okay, so I'm shooting a video. How many steps does it take to go from when I hit record to when that is posted and visible for folks to see? And what in that process can I find numerically to reduce? If it would be 20 steps normally, is there a way I can cut that down to 15? What can I do process-wise to improve flow, to speed things up, make my life less complicated? And so when I look at your spotter's guide, and I realize that, again, this year was 60 cars spread across 4 classes, I just giggle a little bit because it looks to me like, good Lord, man, you have no concept of steps or reducing them because you put a hell of a lot of information in. And so, here's just one thing that I love. I love looking at this and realizing that these little accent points are made because, to you they matter. So this is just me sharing an appreciation of looking at one car on your spotter guide. So if I'm looking at the 2017 version, for example, and I'm noting among the GT cars, there are 2 Aston Martin entries here in the fully pro GTE category. And if I look at the differences between the 2, plus also the amount of information that you pack in there, that's the part where, again, just process-wise, I'm blown away. So let's go with the number 97 entry in just this little rectangular box of the information that you include in here. And I'll get to the car itself in a moment. So, okay. So at the very bottom, you have the car's nationality, the entry's nationality, that being British. So there's a British flag. Aston Martin Racing, yes. So you've included Aston Martin Racing, and then next to that on the bar below the car, you've included the model name, Aston Martin Vantage. So here, black bar, 3 pieces of information included. If we move up to the top left corner of just this number 97 model, you have the car number, number 97, which is green. It's because that, again, in 2017, that was the car plate number required for the class to signal it for what it was. And below it, you have LMGTE Pro. So you call out the car number, the class, and the required color for it. Below that, you have Dunlop, and not just written Dunlop, but the actual logo and their logo in yellow, so that we know what tire brand they're affiliated with. And below that, you have the car's badge, Aston Martin, so we know the manufacturer, not just what you've written, but also with the official Marks badge as well. Then if you move up from there, you have this kind of roof-looking thing with the number 39. And this is something, having covered Le Mans many times, why I just love this. You've gone in and included the garage number. So if you want to see the number 97 Aston Martin, you would know to go to garage number 39. And this is included for everything else. If you wanted to see the Proton Racing number 88 GTE AM car last year, they were in garage number 5. Doesn't sound like much, but it's little things like this where you go, oh, hey, I got to go interview so-and-so, or I just want to see whatever as a fan. It's little things like this where you go, thank goodness that's included. So it was in Garage 39. Next to that, you've included the series of origin for the car, and that was the WEC World Endurance Championship, compared to some other cars, which have either WeatherTech, IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship badges, European Le Mans Series, Asian Le Mans Series, and above that, you have what calls out the difference between these two factory Aston Martins, where you've written for the 97, it has a fluorescent lime strip above the windshield. Its sister car is a red strip, so that's how you would tell what's what when the two of them are going by, either at night or otherwise. Move up from there, and you have the 3 drivers listed, Darren Turner, Jonathan Adam, and Daniel Serra. DT, British, you have the British flag. Adam is British as well, British flag. Serra, Brazilian, you have the Brazilian flag. Going one step further, since the ACO and WEC use a driver rating system based on various metal certification, you have P for platinum for Darren Turner, a little coin. Next to that, for Adam, you have G for a little gold coin, and Serra as well, a gold coin denoting gold. Move to the far right, you have all three primary forms of social media engagement for the Aston Martin team, and this is again just another thing that I appreciate. You have the Twitter logo at AMR, all uppercase, _official, and the O is uppercase. You have Instagram next with the Instagram logo at Aston Martin Racing Official, all lowercase. And then you move to Facebook, where it's at Aston Martin Racing. So here's a team, and this might be something for them to think about. They have 3 different social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and all 3 addresses are different. Yet, again, through your guide, I know exactly what I'm looking for, whether it's uppercase, lowercase, Aston Martin Racing Official, or just Aston Martin Racing, or AMR _official. It's the little attention to detail items like that, Andy, that I'm just sharing my appreciation as someone who has used and continues to use your spotter guides to do my job. That part is phenomenal. And then, again, I haven't even mentioned the car, where it's beautifully done, beautifully represented with all of the logos in place perfectly, and some shading as well, so that it pops off the page. It's not, a truly 3D rendered thing, but as you mentioned, you're trying to do 60 cars here. So with all that said, and that's just one car out of... Tell me a little bit more about this. Tell us a little bit more about either the logos themselves. Are those things that you recreate by hand, or you get from teams or sponsors? I'm sure there isn't a single answer to any of that. And then also tell me about some of the shading, because you mentioned style earlier, and there is a unique Andy Blackmore spotter guide style, but I'm guessing that shading is part of how you achieve that?
Yeah, you have to balance the time really. Actually, more so with the IMSA guide because I have 100 cars to produce. I can't realistically get started until it'll be in December. They have a printed guide that goes to press 10 days before Daytona, so that doesn't give me much time. And some of the new cars tend to debut at Daytona, so I have to sort of pick my battles really. So my shading has ended up being just sort of solid shading, which creates a particular style. I could do something with gradients and do something a bit more high end, which I do for illustrations for various clients like Corvette and stuff. But for this, I need to get something that's going to work when it's printed out small, so it doesn't get sort of muddy or too busy. So that's sort of in terms of the shading. The logos, well, Aston Martin's a great example because Aston Martin have always been awesome in providing logos, reference, anything I need. They're one of the top teams that help me out every year on year. So all those logos on the Aston come from the team. There's some other teams where I have to either get the photo reference from the daily sports car guys or I find logos online. And one little trick, if you're looking for a logo of a company,
tricks,
is
yes,
to search PDFs, and most PDFs, when you open them in Adobe Illustrator, you will get the original source vector logo, which is vector is basically all lines and points, and it's how they make logos for corporate identity, and basically it's what the whole graphic industry uses, and it's used for vinyl, it's used for embroidery. So every company, or most companies, will have vector versions of the logos. So if I get that from, let's say, a PDF of an annual report of, let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say Racer magazine, then I know that will be correct. So the same if let's say Kodak, or, a small company. Sometimes you can find a price list. So there's different avenues, and worst case scenario, it can be even down to I go to the local, let's say, coffee shop, Tim Hortons for me, and scan their logo in and then redraw it.
You're lucky.
In terms of all the
Tim
information,
Hortons
top Brazilian company now, it's no longer Canadian.
Mm.
In terms of all the information, some of that comes from the teams, some of that comes from my research and reference, some of it comes from people like Shay. And a lot of that's come from me asking online on social, what would you like on the guides? And I've had commentators, I've had photographers, and I've obviously had fans and corner workers, marshals as well, what they want on the guides. So that's why the garage numbers are on there. A couple of photographers each year ask for it, and then some people say, oh, why do you do Twitter handles? So yeah, I've had Twitter handles for 6 or 7 years now, and again with the driver grading system. And then what I introduced last year after qualifying, there's one final update of the guide, and then the actual grid positions added in as well by the just underneath the pit garage logo. And hopefully all that information keeps it popular, keeps it current, because there's nothing worse than having an out of date or inaccurate spotter guide. And hopefully brings people coming back to me, because nowadays there's competition. There's every series does spotter guides now. I started doing this 13-14 years ago in the UK with a Seat one make championship, and that actually came off the back of me doing some liveries for Seat.
Wow.
I ended up doing British Touring Cars then, and doing the car graphics for the TV, for the grid, and all the the on-board sort of graphics for a few years there. And that's when I then started to do the Le Mans guides, and just grew from there really.
Well, let's close on a topic or two, Andy. So I know that you have had Dunlop was the most recent sponsor for your Spotter's Guide. You have a new sponsor this year, which we usually don't do sponsor stuff here on the podcast, but as a fellow small business owner, whatever we need to do to keep you in business is great. But tell me about the amount of hours that go into a Spotter's Guide. You think at least from start to finish, and then also about how this maybe isn't again your full-time thing, how you pay the bills, but it is good to have advertisers that come in to try and help offset those costs. And then let's close on any fun spotter guide stories you might be able to share.
So probably the IMSA guide takes a bit more time because it's doing a lot of stuff from scratch. I would have thought it's probably the IMSA guide's probably 80, 90, 100 hours to start off with, and then you probably a couple of hours each event because it gets updated at each event. And then with the Le Mans, it's hard. It's probably about similar. So it's probably about 80 hours to get it all done. And then obviously, some years we have driver changes, car changes. So I tend to update them during the race week. So again, keeping it up to date. The challenge is that eats into my bread and butter. So for quite a few years when I was working at EA and it wasn't a viable thing, but it was a passion, and obviously still is a passion. But now as a one-man band, self-employed like yourself, then sponsorship is important, and I never want to charge for the guides. That's something I've always been against, and a few times people said, "Oh, do a crowdfunding thing." It's like that's not what I'm doing it for, So having a sponsor on board, be it with IMSA, with their official guides, and Lamborghini in both Europe and North America, I do their spotter guides. Le Mans is because it's such a big guide is obviously a huge number of hours. So this year I'm very fortunate to have WeatherTech as a partner. Now WeatherTech's is an awesome fit, hopefully for them, but for me as well, because they have 2 entries this year. So this helps them get a bit more awareness at the track, and so people can pick their cars out. And they have Keaton Motorsport entry, which is being run by Risi, and that, as you'll see on the spotter guide when it comes out, that has a red base with their traditional livery on. And then you've got JMW Motorsport, who won last year, and they're obviously in they're also in a Ferrari 488, and they're in the white car. So hopefully, even though they're GTE AM, they'll get a lot of coverage, and I'll make sure they get a lot of coverage through social media to make their investment worthwhile. So, I've got to thank them for that, because particularly this year and in the past with Dunlop, without those, then I wouldn't be able to do it, because it's just too much of a hit on the monthly, the realities of paying the mortgage and paying the bills. So, yeah.
All right. Well, let's close on, I know you've heard back from various people some interesting or unique places where the spotter guide has popped up. Tell us about some of the more interesting usages. And I'm not talking about toilet paper, because if anyone...
that has been done.
What?
Yeah. Years ago, I was doing some work for a race simulation game, and they were offering a prize. So I did a Twitter thing about the best usage of the spotter guide, and somebody had actually printed it out, cut all the cars out, stuck them together, and then attached it to a toilet roll. One of the other good ones was Carol Bink and her husband, well known to the Midweek Motorsport Collective. A few years ago, they went to the local printers to get it printed. The printer didn't write down the size they wanted, and they ended up with, like, in Europe you call it A0, so it's like sort of about 5 foot tall, and there's 2 of these sheets, so they stuck it to their living room. And then I see the spotter guides all over the place. So the best ones are always seeing the commentary teams use them. So there's been years where every single commentary team has used my spotter guides, and even though there is an official guide out, I'm totally transparent of that. Hopefully mine has more detail and more information. And last year on social media, you could see various commentary teams, including the official one, all were using my guide. So it's cool to see that. And the other good one is I've had quite a few kids, and what they do is they cut them up, and then they keep moving them in the order according to where they are, like, after a few hours. And there's one guy, and they put it basically, they stick it to their door each year. So yeah, it's cool, and obviously, get kids' interest. That's tomorrow's races, so it's pretty cool.
I love it, my man. Well, thank you for taking some time, Andy. I mean, we're fortunate to get to see you at usually 2 or 3 races per year. I know you don't get out to as many as you want, but kind of at that time of the year where it doesn't matter what automotive or racing site you visit, links to the Andy Blackmore Spotter Guide site start to kick off. So I figured, now's the perfect time. And, again, I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I'm staring at a stack here that I have of them, and I've kept them because they're beautiful. To me, it's just this cool, free art. And, especially if you want to either look back at a race and write something about it or whatever, you, of course, can go online. But it's also, I find it easy to grab, the one from the 2011 such and such and pull that up and, okay, that's who the co-driver was. Or, okay, that I thought it was numbered this, but it's actually numbered that. So, they're pretty cool keepsakes as well. And with them laminated, in theory, they will outlast me. They could go to the landfill, but those suckers are going to survive. So, anyways, Andy, thanks so much, man. This is cool, and hopefully we'll find another reason to do a part 2, maybe on the straight-up livery design side, because that's another area where I possess zero talent, yet I'm always quick to profess what I love when I see them on cars. So, thank you, mate, and hopefully you won't have too many updates you have to make between now and the end of the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
Well, we'll see. Thank you for all your support over the years, because without the likes of you and Radio Le Mans and Daily Sports Car, then, I wouldn't be able to, do the spotter guides, but also, my livery sort of side of things wouldn't be quite as successful as it is. Like this year, I think I have 15 cars in IMSA and about 12 in PWC. So, I've got to thank you guys and obviously various people on social media that keep sort of retweeting and favouring my random posts. So thanks, everyone.
And that was my man, Andy Blackmore. I love that guy. Funny cat, incredibly helpful. He does so much for the sport to, I think, make some of the harder to grasp, more intricate things that makes, if you love endurance racing, you know that it is not the easiest thing to digest. So when you get someone like Andy who puts in a lot of work and isn't really making any serious profit from the spotter guides, when someone like that puts in the work and helps make our lives a little bit easier, we know that for years and years, Radio Le Mans, I think, has evangelized Andy's work and his spotter guides in particular, and really from there it's taken off, where so many broadcasters and fans, folks on pit lane, you name it, just rely on his work. So really cool to spend some time with Andy talking about himself, so you get to know him a little bit better and also to understand his artistic process. All right, I'm Marshall Pruitt. This is the Marshall Pruitt Podcast presented by Cooper Tires. Thank you for listening.